"Marry me by sunset," the stranger said, "and you'll have a roof over your head before dark." Amelia Carter hadn't eaten in 2 days. No money, no job, not one soul in that frontier town who even knew her name. And now a man on horseback was looking down at her, offering marriage to a woman he'd known for less than an hour. She had 11 cents in her pocket and nothing left to lose. So she looked up at him and made the most terrifying decision of her life. If this story moves you, subscribe to the channel, follow along, all the way to the end, and drop a comment, telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. "Marry me by sunset," the stranger said, "and you'll have a roof over your head before dark." Amelia Carter hadn't eaten in 2 days. No money, no job, not one soul in that frontier town who even knew her name. And now, a man on horseback was looking down at her, offering marriage to a woman he'd known for less than an hour. She had 11 cents in her pocket and nothing left to lose. So she looked up at him and made the most terrifying decision of her life. If this story moves you, subscribe to the channel, follow along all the way to the end, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Part 1. The woman at the boarding house didn't even let Amelia finish her sentence. "You're the girl from the letter," she said. It wasn't a question. It was a verdict. Amelia stood on the front step with her suitcase held shut by a strip of leather she'd torn off a broken boot, and she tried to keep her voice steady. "I am Amelia Carter. Mrs. Hartley wrote to me in Ohio. She promised me a room and work in exchange for—" Mrs. Hartley passed 6 weeks ago. For a moment, Amelia couldn't make the words fit together. She had read that letter so many times the paper had gone soft at the folds. She had pressed it against her chest in the train station like it was a deed to something real. And now the woman who'd written it was gone, and this stranger in the doorway was looking at her the way you look at a bill you don't intend to pay. "Her daughter runs the place now," the woman went on. "We don't need help. We don't have room." "I'm sorry about Mrs. Hartley," Amelia said, and she meant it even now. "But I've come a very long way. I don't have anywhere. I'm sorry too." The door closed. Amelia stood there and looked at the grain of the wood. She was not the kind of woman who fell apart. She had not fallen apart when her father died. She had not fallen apart when the lawyer read the list of debts aloud in that cold parlor, and her uncle looked at his own shoes rather than at her. She did not fall apart now. She picked up her suitcase and she walked back to the road. That was how the day began. The general store was next. The owner was a barrel-chested man named Pruitt, sun-cracked and suspicious, and he barely looked up from his ledger. "I need work," Amelia said. "Anything. I can keep accounts. I can cook, clean, mend." "Don't hire women for anything past the counter," Pruitt said. "And I've got my wife for that." "Sir, I'll work for meals, just until I can—" "No positions." He turned a page. "Try the hotel." She tried the hotel. A thin man in a good vest looked her up and down and said, "Only work I've got is the night shift." And something in the way his eyes moved made her step backward before her mind had even finished translating what he meant. "Thank you for your time," she said, and got herself out the door. She tried the schoolhouse, though she already knew the term had started. The teacher was a nervous young man who looked barely older than 20, and he wrung his hands the whole time he talked. "The district has no funding for an assistant. I'm sorry. You might try the church." The church was locked. By 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Amelia Carter had walked the length of Willow Creek, Montana, twice. Her feet hurt. Her mouth was dry as paper. She sat down on a barrel outside the feed store and tried to make a plan the way her father had taught her, logically, one piece at a time. There was a stage headed east in 3 days. She had no money for the fare. There was no family to wire. Her father was dead. Her uncle had made it plain the day the debts came due that he considered his obligation to her finished. There had been a kind woman at church back in Ohio, but kind and capable of sending money fast enough to matter were two different things. She sat there. The 11 cents in her pocket felt like a small, cold stone. She did not cry. but she felt very clearly the particular weight of a person standing at the exact edge of what they can bear, looking down at what comes after. "You've been sitting on that barrel for better than an hour." She looked up so fast her neck twinged. A man was there on a dark horse only a few feet away, and she hadn't heard him come up at all, which startled her more than the words did. He was somewhere in his early 30s, lean and brown from weather, a few days past a razor, with eyes the gray of creek water over stone. He wasn't looking at her the way the others had. He wasn't looking at her with pity, and he wasn't looking at her with that other thing the hotel man had. He was just looking at her carefully, the way you'd read the weather. "I know," she said. "I'm leaving." "Where to?" She didn't have an answer, and something about how plainly he'd asked it made the lack of an answer sit heavier in her chest than it had a moment before. She looked back at the road. "My name is Nathan Walker," the man said. "I've got a ranch about 9 miles north up in the foothills." "Good for you," she said, and then heard herself and flushed. "I'm sorry. That was rude." "You're tired and you're in trouble," he said. "You don't have to apologize for that." She looked at him again. He'd said it plainly without making her feel small for any of it, and that alone was strange enough to hold her attention. "Amelia Carter," she said. "Miss Carter." He tilted his head a fraction. "Can I ask you something direct?" "You can ask." "Do you have anywhere to go tonight?" The 11 cents sat in her pocket. "I'm working on it," she said. Nathan Walker was quiet a moment. He looked up the road, then back at her, and when he spoke again, his voice hadn't changed at all. Still careful, like a man choosing which rock to step on. "Crossing a river. My wife passed 14 months ago," he said. Amelia said nothing. "I've got a ranch with more work than I can manage on my own. I need someone who can handle the books, keep the house accounts, track what's coming in and going out. It's real work, Miss Carter, not simple." "I'm listening," she said. "I'm not offering you charity, and I'm not looking for a hired hand who will leave in the spring." He paused. "What I need is something permanent. I'm talking about marriage." Somewhere near the dry goods store, a woman who had been pretending to examine a bolt of fabric went very still. 2 men outside the barber shop stopped talking. Amelia felt the whole street lean in, and she kept her eyes on Nathan Walker. "You don't know me," she said. "No. I could be anyone. I could be a liar. I could be running from something." "So could I," he said. "But I've watched you for an hour. When Pruitt turned you out of that store, I was across the street. You thanked him anyway. That tells you I have manners. It doesn't tell you whether I'm honest." "No," he agreed. "It doesn't. You could be lying to me, and I'd be no worse off than I am right now." A beat. "Can you say the same?" She looked down at the suitcase in the dirt, the leather strap, the scuffed corner from where it had hit the floor in the Denver station. She thought about the boarding house door closing, about the hotel man's eyes, about the church being locked. She thought about her father, who had trusted a dishonest partner because he believed most men, given the chance, would do right, and had been wrong about that. Dead wrong. But she had never been entirely sure he'd been wrong about the believing part. "I can keep accounts," she said. "My father trained me. He ran a print business in Ohio. I handled his ledgers from the time I was 15. Good. I can run a household. I'm not afraid of work. Good. But I have to tell you something first." She lifted her chin and made herself meet his eyes. "There are rumors that followed me out of Columbus. I don't know how far they've spread. After my father died, people said things about me. About why the business failed. About things that weren't true. I want you to know that before you make this offer solid." Nathan Walker looked at her for a long moment. "Rumors travel fast on the frontier," he said. "They're usually wrong. I've had a few of my own." He reached down and extended his hand. "We can talk the details on the ride out, but you'll need to decide before the sun's behind those mountains. After dark, the road gets harder." And that was the whole of it. No poetry. No promises she couldn't test. A man she didn't know was offering her a contract dressed up as a marriage, and she was about to accept it because the only other choice was an empty road in a town that had shut every door in her face. But she looked at his hand, rough, steady, not grabbing, just offered, and she thought, he didn't have to stop. He could have ridden past like every single person in this town rode past. He saw the same woman the boarding house saw and the hotel man saw, and he stopped. She took his hand. He pulled her up behind him with an ease that told her he'd already expected her to say yes, or perhaps had simply never let himself imagine no. Neither of them spoke. And then from the sidewalk, a woman's voice rang out sharp and carrying. Nathan Walker, have you lost your mind entirely? The woman came down off the sidewalk to stand near the horse. She was near 50, with gray hair pulled back so tight it seemed to lift her eyebrows, and she had the voice of a person accustomed to being listened to. That woman arrived this morning with nothing and nobody, she said to Nathan in the tone you use with a man who hasn't quite done something unforgivable yet, but is very close. You don't know the first thing about her. I know enough, Nathan said. You're a man with land and a reputation, and you are about to tie yourself to a stranger who... Francis? His voice didn't rise. It didn't have to. There was something in its steadiness that had the same weight another man's shout would have. I've thought about it. Francis Calhoun turned to Amelia directly without pretense. What's your name, girl? Amelia Carter, ma'am. Where are you from? Columbus, Ohio. Family? None living. Francis's jaw shifted. And you're willing to marry a man you met an hour ago? I am. Amelia held the woman's gaze and did not look away. Because I have no choice. Because he offered me one. And that's more than anyone else in this town did today. Francis looked at her a long moment. Then she looked back at Nathan, and something passed between them. Some older, longer conversation carried out entirely without words, the kind that exists only between people who have known each other most of their lives. You'll come through town, Francis said finally to Nathan. You'll do it proper. Reverend Marsh is at the church Tuesday mornings. You'll go Tuesday. It's Sunday, Nathan said. Then you've got 2 days to change your mind. Francis stepped back. The girl can stay at my house tonight if she needs to. She'll stay at the ranch, Nathan said. Francis made a sound that wasn't quite a word. There's a Mrs. Aldrich next door who can chaperone, Nathan added in the tone of a man who had anticipated exactly this argument. I spoke to her this morning. Francis Calhoun stopped entirely. This morning, she repeated. Nathan did not elaborate. Francis looked at Amelia again, and this time there was less certainty in her face and more thought. Tuesday, she said, and walked back to the sidewalk. The ride out took nearly an hour, and they spent most of it in a silence that wasn't uncomfortable exactly, but was full of all the things two people who've just made a permanent decision haven't said to each other yet. You spoke to Mrs. Aldrich this morning, Amelia said finally. Before you found me. Yes. You were already thinking about this, marriage, specifically. A pause. My ranch isn't set up for a hired woman living alone, Nathan said, eyes on the road ahead. It would make talk that would make the situation worse for both of us. Marriage made more practical sense. You're a very practical man. I've had to be. She let a mile go by. Then, before she'd fully formed the thought, were you practical with your first wife? She felt him stiffen not much but enough to register through his back since she was riding behind him. Margaret wasn't a practical decision, he said after a moment. She was someone I loved. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have asked that. You can ask things. I'd rather you ask than assume. All right. She looked at the mountains. How did she die? Fever. The winter before last. Came on fast. A beat. She was 29. There was nothing sufficient to say to that, so Amelia said nothing, and Nathan let the nothing sit. I'm not asking you to be what she was, he said after a while. I want to be clear about that. This is a different kind of arrangement. I understand. But I'll treat you with respect. That's not something I'll negotiate on. I don't expect you to. And if it doesn't work... He started again. If after a year you find it's not livable, We'll figure out a fair way to handle it. I won't hold you to something that makes you miserable." Amelia turned that over. A man she'd known 2 hours was already planning with more care than most men she'd known for years, for the possibility that she might one day want to walk away from him. "Why did you stop?" she asked. "In town. You didn't have to." He was quiet a long time, long enough that she thought he wouldn't answer. "My mother came west with nothing," he said finally. "Arrived at the wrong place with a letter that turned out worthless. Nobody who'd help her." A pause. "Somebody helped her anyway. That's how I came to exist." The horse walked on. The mountains grew closer, and Amelia held her suitcase across her lap and felt something loosen in her chest that had been pulled tight for a very long time. Not happiness. Not yet. But the first small loosening that comes before it. Odd. The house was smaller than she'd imagined, and cleaner. A man living alone doesn't accumulate things, or at least Nathan hadn't. There was a main room with a fireplace, a kitchen, 2 bedrooms, furniture that was heavy and honest and made no attempt to impress anyone. But on the mantel above the fireplace were 3 small things: a woman's thimble, a photograph in a tin frame, and a river rock with some kind of marking scratched into it. Amelia looked at the photograph. Then she made herself look away. Mrs. Aldrich arrived within 20 minutes, a small, brisk woman of about 60, who seemed to find the whole situation more interesting than scandalous, which Amelia appreciated more than she could have said. She brought a covered dish and installed herself in the main room with the efficiency of a woman who had chaperoned before and considered it a reasonable service to provide. Nathan showed Amelia the second bedroom. A bed, a washstand, a window that faced the mountain. "It was the guest room," he said. "Margaret kept it ready." "It's fine," Amelia said. "It's very fine." He nodded and looked at the room a moment himself. "There are books on the shelf in the main room. If you want something for tonight, I'll be up early." "I'll be up early too." He looked at her, then a longer look than before, as if he were recalibrating something. Then he nodded again and left her alone. She found the ledger books after dinner. She hadn't gone looking for trouble. She'd only asked Nathan where she might start understanding the operation, and he'd pointed to a trunk beside the desk and said the records were in there. He had not exaggerated their state. 4 years of ledgers all in Nathan's hand, not bad, but inconsistent. Numbers crowding each other at the ends of the rows. Entries skipped and then doubled back too. Receipts folded loose into the pages. And running through the earliest books, a woman's hand, smaller, more precise. Then a clear line where that hand disappeared, and Nathan's alone continued shakier than before, like a man trying to keep his footing on ground that had shifted under him. Amelia sat at the desk for 2 hours, not organizing, yet just reading, getting the shape of the thing. And the shape of the thing was worse than Nathan had let on. The ranch wasn't ruined. The cattle were bringing in reasonable money. The land itself was worth something, but the expenses were poorly tracked, and there were payments that made no sense to her at all. Large round numbers going to a company she didn't recognize. Twice a year, regular as the seasons, more than the ranch could easily afford. Meridian Land Company. January. Meridian Land Company. August. She was still frowning at those entries when the front door opened. Nathan came in from outside stamping mud from his boots and stopped when he saw her at the desk. "You found them," he said. "You weren't wrong about the state of the records." "No." He came to stand beside her looking at the open ledger without visible embarrassment. "I'm better with a horse than a ledger book. These payments." She pointed. "Meridian Land Company. Every January, every August. What is that?" Something changed in his face, not much, but something like a door closing quietly somewhere inside him. "That's something I'll explain," he said. "Not tonight." Amelia looked up at him. "Is the ranch in debt to them?" "Not exactly." "Nathan." She said his name carefully. It was the first time she'd used it. "If I'm going to help you manage this properly, I need to understand what I'm looking at." He held her gaze. Then he reached down and turned the ledger toward himself. Though she had the distinct sense he didn't need to look at the entry at all, that he could have recited it from memory in his sleep. "The Meridian Land Company is run by a man named Richard Blackwell," he said. "He's been trying to buy this property for 3 years. What you see there isn't a debt. It's a record of offers I've refused." "You wrote his offers in your own ledger." "I wrote them so I wouldn't forget what he was willing to pay." "A beat. And so I wouldn't forget to ask myself why." Amelia looked back down at the numbers. They were large, larger than she'd registered on the first pass, and a cold, quiet understanding began to move in her chest. "This land," she said slowly, "is worth a great deal more than it looks." Nathan didn't answer right away. "Get some sleep, Miss Carter," he said finally. "There'll be time for all of it." But as she set the ledger back and rose from the chair, she looked at his face once more. And she saw something there she hadn't seen all afternoon, not the practical weathered steadiness of the road, not the settled grief of a man who missed his wife. Something else. Something that looked, if she was reading it right, very much like fear. Tuesday came, and they were married in a plain ceremony, in a plain little church, with Reverend Marsh asking questions in his kind, tired voice, and Nathan answering them in a tone that was even and sure. When it came to Amelia's turn, she answered the same way, not performing a conviction she didn't have, but not performing doubt either. She was here. She had made a choice. She would honor it until something told her she shouldn't. There were 5 or 6 townspeople in the pews who had come for reasons that had nothing to do with goodwill. She could see it in the way they stood slightly apart, the way their attention was sharper than the occasion required. She had grown up around enough of her father's business dealings to recognize people who attend events not to celebrate, but to collect information. When Nathan kissed her cheek formal quick, his jaw tensing with the self-consciousness of a private man in a public moment, Francis Calhoun crossed to Amelia and gripped her hand in both of hers. "He is a better man than this town deserves," Francis said very quietly. "Don't let them make you doubt that." Amelia thought about that the entire ride home. The first week was made of work, not just hard work, but complicated work. She learned the geography of the ranch. She learned the ranch hands. Charlie Betts, the young one, freckle-faced, full of energy and goodwill, but not much precision. Holt, the older one, meticulous and reliable, and near silent, who watched her with the weariness of a man who'd seen arrangements like this go badly before. She didn't try to win him over. She just worked steadily and let him decide for himself. On the 3rd day, she reorganized the supply ledger and found they'd been ordering 20% more feed than the horses needed, because nobody had adjusted the count after Nathan sold 2 horses the year before. She brought the paper to him quietly over dinner. He set down his fork. "That's a waste we didn't need." "It's fixable going forward. I'll adjust the order." He nodded, went back to his food. Then, after a moment, "Thank you. It's what I'm here for." "Still," he said, "thank you." She learned that he took his coffee black and slightly cooled, that he checked the horses before bed every night, that he read when he couldn't sleep history mostly, and one battered volume of poetry on his bedside table that he never once mentioned. She learned he was generous with his hands in ways nobody required of him. He adjusted Charlie's hours when the boy's mother took ill and didn't dock his pay for it. When a neighbor's fence blew down in a windstorm, Nathan spent a whole Saturday helping repair it without being asked. And she learned that once a week on Wednesdays, a man named Greer came to the ranch. Greer was no ranch hand. He wore better clothes than that, and he carried himself with the weight of a man who worked for money rather than for land. He and Nathan always spoke privately in the barn, and Nathan always came out of those meetings with his jaw set and his eyes gone somewhere far off. On the 4th Wednesday, Amelia was in the kitchen garden when Greer arrived, and she watched Nathan walk out to meet him. Watched the way his whole posture changed. Not defeated. Braced. The way a man braces for something he's been bracing for a long time. When Nathan came back inside, she didn't ask. But that evening, in the quiet that had somehow become their version of comfort, he set down his fork and said out of nothing, Greer works for Blackwell. Amelia set down her own fork. He comes every week to make another offer. Has for 2 years. And you keep refusing. Yes. He looked at his plate. He came today with a new one, substantially larger. Blackwell apparently believes I'll eventually reach a point where I can't say no. Is he right? Nathan looked up. No. Why not? If the money's that large. Because this land belonged to my parents, he said. And before them to the people who worked it with them. And Blackwell isn't the kind of man who buys things to build them. He buys things to take what's in them and leave. A pause. I've seen what he leaves behind. Amelia looked at him across the table. This quiet man who'd ridden to town looking to hire someone and come home with a wife instead. Who paid for his neighbor's medicine and let his young hand nurse a sick mother and turned down a fortune because of what a rocky hillside meant to 2 dead people. He'll escalate, she said quietly. Yes, if the offers don't work, he'll try something else. Then we need to make sure the books are in order, every record, every payment, every boundary marker. If he comes at this legally or through a claim, we need it all documented, so there's no argument. Something shifted in Nathan's face, not the fear she'd glimpsed that first night, but something that sat right next to it and pushed it gently back. You understand what you're getting into, he said. If Blackwell decides we're standing in his way, I understand. It could get difficult. Nathan, she met his eyes. I arrived in this town with 11 cents and a letter that was worthless. Everything since has already been better than that. He was quiet, a long moment. Then something happened she hadn't seen from him before. Small, almost nothing, but she caught it. The edge of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. The shape of one beginning. All right, he said. Then we start tomorrow. It was 3 weeks into their marriage when Amelia found the second set of documents. She'd been working through the trunk systematically building a proper filing system when her fingers closed on a sealed envelope tucked into the back of the oldest ledger. It wasn't hidden exactly, just placed like something no one had expected to need again. Inside was a survey document old professionally drawn with measurements and boundary markers for the Walker Ranch. She spread it on the desk. She looked at it. Then she looked at it again. Then she sat back and the cold understanding from that first night came flooding all the way in. The northwest corner, the part that looked from the house like a rocky hillside, going nowhere in particular, sat directly above what the surveyor's notation described as a substantial mineral deposit. The notation was old. It might mean nothing, but if it meant something, it explained everything. It explained why Blackwell wanted this land. It explained why he kept coming back. It explained why the offers kept getting larger. And it explained with a clarity that settled in her chest, like river water, why a man who left things destroyed behind him would not stop at offers once the offers stopped working. She held the paper a long time. Then she folded it carefully, put it back in its envelope, and placed the envelope somewhere new, somewhere only she would know to look. And then she went to find her husband. He was in the barn, working on a harness with the focused quiet of a man using his hands to clear his head. He looked up when she came in. There's something you need to tell me, she said. He held her gaze. About what's in the northwest corner of your property, she said, and about why you really need someone you can trust. The barn went very still. A horse shifted in its stall. The wind moved through the gaps in the boards. Nathan Walker set down the harness, and for the first time since she'd taken his hand on that dusty road in Willow Creek, there was none of that careful steadiness in his face. What was there instead was something rarer and more human and more afraid. Sit down, he said quietly. This is going to take a while. Nathan didn't sit down right away. He stood in the middle of the barn with his hands at his sides, and looked at Amelia the way a man looks at something he's been dreading for a very long time. Not with surprise, but with the exhaustion of someone who has been waiting for a reckoning and is almost relieved it's finally here. How much did you see? He asked. Enough. She kept her voice level. The survey. The mineral notation in the northwest corner. The dates. She paused. The size of Blackwell's offers suddenly makes a great deal of sense. He turned away and leaned against the barn wall with one hand, his back half to her. The silence stretched, and this time it was not the comfortable kind. "How long have you known?" she asked. "About the deposit?" He let out a slow breath. "My father found the first signs of it when I was 12. Had a proper survey done when I was 15. Never told a soul outside the family." A pause. "He said the land wasn't worth dying over, but men would die for what was under it if they knew. So he kept it quiet. And after he died, I kept it quiet too. And when Blackwell started making offers, you knew he'd found out somehow. Not the full survey. I don't think he has that. But rumors travel, and Blackwell keeps people whose only job is to listen for them." Nathan turned back to face her, and his face was doing the thing she'd noticed before, the control so careful that the control itself told you something enormous was happening underneath it. "I didn't tell you because I didn't know you, because the fewer people who know, the safer the land is. And now I know. And now you found it yourself." Something moved in his eyes. Not quite humor, not quite resignation. "You're thorough." "You hired me to be thorough." "I did." He looked at her steadily. "Are you angry?" She considered the question seriously, the way it deserved. She had a right to be. She had married this man in good faith, and he had held back something that changed the entire shape of the ground beneath her feet. That was not a small thing, but she had kept her father's books for 11 years. She knew what information did to people. She knew what it felt like to watch a man hand something valuable to someone who hadn't yet earned it, and to watch what came after. "Not angry," she said finally, "but I need you to understand something. If Blackwell escalates, and he will, and I'm going to stand between you and whatever he does, then I cannot do it blind. Not again. Not with half the picture." She held his eyes. "I need to know everything, the full survey, every conversation you've had with his people. Whatever legal ground you're standing on, and wherever that ground is shaky, all of it." Nathan studied her face a long moment. "Everything," he said. "Everything." He pushed off the wall, reached up to a high shelf she wouldn't have thought to look at, and brought down a flat wooden box she'd never seen. He set it on the workbench between them. "Then let's start here." The box held more than the survey. A dozen letters from Blackwell's company, each one more formal and more pointed than the last. Notes from a lawyer in Helena that Nathan had consulted 2 years back about the legality of Blackwell's approaches. A copy of the original land patent his father had filed, and beside it a second document that Amelia had to read twice before she understood what she was looking at. "Nathan." "Yes, this boundary description." She set her finger on a paragraph in the patent. "It uses a creek marker, Mitchell Creek." "Yes?" "Mitchell Creek changed course. I noticed it on the survey. The current creek line doesn't match the one written here." Nathan went very still. "If Blackwell's lawyers find that discrepancy," she said, "they could argue the boundary is unclear. They could use it to challenge the patent itself." "I know," Nathan said quietly. She looked up. "You know, and you didn't have it corrected." "I didn't know how serious it was. I thought—" He stopped, looked at the paper. "I thought it was a technicality, something too small to matter." "It's not small." She set the document flat and looked at it hard. "A good lawyer could build a very solid argument out of this, especially if Blackwell has influence with the Territorial Land Commission, which I assume he does." "He does." Nathan's voice didn't rise, but it carried a weight it hadn't before. "He's got Judge Harlan in his pocket. Everyone in this territory knows it. Nobody says it out loud because Harlan can make life very hard for people who talk." Amelia absorbed that. She thought of her father, a good man, a careful man who had lost everything because he trusted that the rules were the same for everyone and didn't understand until it was too late that the rules bent for men with money and straightened right back up for men without it. "When does Greer come next?" she asked. "Wednesday, 6 days." "Good." She gathered the documents into a stack. "I'm going to need those 6 days. She didn't sleep much in those 6 days. She worked at the desk in the main room while Nathan slept, spreading the papers under the lamplight, reading them the way her father had taught her to read a contract, not for what it said but for what it didn't. For the gaps. For the places where a careful person had left room, and whether that room had been left by accident or on purpose. On the 3rd night, Nathan came out of his room past midnight and found her still at it. He didn't say anything at first. He went to the kitchen and came back with 2 cups of coffee and set one beside her without being asked. She looked up. "You don't have to do this at night," he said. "I think better when it's quiet." "Then I'll be quiet." He sat in the chair by the fireplace with his own cup and opened the battered poetry volume and read, or appeared to. She noticed he turned the pages far less often than a man actually reading would. After a while, she said without looking up, "Did Blackwell ever approach Margaret before she died?" Nathan was still a moment. "Once. Early on, when the offer started." "What did she say to him?" "Told him the land wasn't for sale, then offered him coffee, which confused him considerably." A pause. "She was better at that than I am, staying pleasant while meaning no." Amelia almost smiled. "She sounds like she was something." She was. His voice was even, carrying the kind of grief that has had time to settle into something a man can carry, rather than something that carries him. "She'd have liked you. She had no patience for people who couldn't see past the surface of a thing. And you're the same way." The compliment was simple and unperformed, and it landed differently than compliments usually did. Amelia turned back to the document in front of her and said nothing, because there wasn't anything to say that wouldn't have been less than the moment. On the 5th day, Charlie Betts came in from mending the north fence line with news sitting in his face like something too big for it. "There were men out by the northwest corner," he said. "2 of them. Didn't recognize either. They had equipment, surveying equipment, I think. Soon as they saw me coming, they packed it up fast and rode off." Nathan's jaw went tight. "Did they speak to you?" "One of them said they were just passing through, but they weren't passing through anywhere. There's no road out there. No reason to be in that corner unless you're looking at it." Nathan looked at Amelia. Amelia looked back at him. "He's already commissioned his own survey," she said. "Looks that way. Which means he's moving faster than his offers suggested." She was already standing. "Nathan, we cannot wait for Greer to come on Wednesday. We need to get to Helena before Blackwell's lawyers do." "Amelia, if he files a boundary challenge based on Mitchell Creek before we get there with a corrected patent application, we lose the initiative. We could spend years in litigation." She was already at the trunk, pulling out the documents she'd organized. "How fast can you get to Helena?" "Hard riding, 2 days." "Then you leave tomorrow morning." Nathan stood up slowly. "I can't leave the ranch unattended. Holt can manage a few days. He knows this place better than anyone." She didn't stop moving. "I'll write out exactly what you present to the land office, exactly what you say, and a separate letter for the lawyer you used before we need him to file a formal boundary correction affidavit immediately. You've been to a territorial land office before." "No. But I've read contracts and patents for 11 years, and I know what they need and what they don't." She looked up at him. "Nathan, you have to trust me on this." He looked at her. This woman he'd brought home 3 weeks ago, who had arrived with 11 cents and a ruined letter, and had in the space of 3 weeks reorganized his finances, found a fatal flaw in his land claim, and was now standing in his kitchen at 5 in the afternoon, telling him with complete certainty what had to happen and in what order. "I trust you," he said. Something happened in Amelia's chest at those 2 words. Something she hadn't been expecting. A warmth that had nothing at all to do with practical arrangements. She turned back to the documents before he could see her face. "Good," she said. "Then sit down and let me explain exactly what you're going to say." He left before sunrise the next morning, his silhouette sharp against the pale sky, and Amelia stood in the yard and watched him go and thought, "This is who I am now. The one who stays and holds the ground while someone else rides." She had barely turned back to the house when she heard hooves on the road. Greer had come. Not on Wednesday, on Tuesday, a full day early, and he was not alone. He rode up to the front of the house with two other men she didn't know, both bigger than Greer, both quieter, with the ease of people who'd decided in advance that they owned the ground they were riding onto. Greer himself was a compact man with a smile that never quite reached his eyes, and when he saw Amelia standing alone in the yard, she watched him recalculate something behind that smile. "Mrs. Walker," he said, his tone suggesting the title was something he found mildly amusing. "I was expecting Nathan." "Nathan isn't here." "I can see that." He looked at the house, then back at her. "We'll wait." "You won't," Amelia said. Greer's smile stayed put. "Pardon. You'll state your business with me, or you'll leave. Those are the options." She folded her hands in front of her, and she hoped to God it looked calmer than she felt, because her heart was going hard and fast. But her face knew how to lie about that. Her father had taught her that too, without ever meaning to. "I am Nathan Walker's wife, and I manage the affairs of this property. If you have something to say to this household, say it to me." Greer looked at her, and the thing behind his eyes was no longer amusement. The two men behind him had the stillness of dogs waiting for a whistle. "Mr. Blackwell," Greer said carefully, "has extended a new offer, the most generous one yet. He's hoping Nathan will consider it seriously this time." "The answer is the same as it always is. You don't know the amount. The amount doesn't matter. The answer is no, Mr. Greer." Greer's voice dropped, became confidential, as if the two men behind him had ceased to exist. "I want to be plain with you because I think you're a practical woman. The boundary question on this property, the one about the creek, is not going to go away. Mr. Blackwell's lawyers are very thorough. It would be better for everyone if this were resolved through an agreement, rather than through the courts." Amelia held his gaze. "Is that a threat?" "It's an observation." "Then I'll give you an observation in return." She stepped forward one deliberate step and watched the movement register on all three of them. Whatever Mr. Blackwell's lawyers are planning, they're already too late. The corrected patent application is on its way to Helena as we speak, along with a formal affidavit from an attorney of record. This was not quite true yet. Nathan was on his way, not there. But Greer didn't know that, and the truth of the intention was the same as the truth of the fact she'd learned that from her father, too. "The boundary question is being resolved through proper legal channels," she went on, and she did not let one flicker cross her face. "If Mr. Blackwell's people file any challenge now, they'll be challenging a correction already in process, which will not reflect well on the nature of their claim." Greer stared at her. The smile was entirely gone now. "You've been busy," he said, and his voice had a different quality in it, the sound of a man rethinking a situation he'd thought was already won. "This is my home," she said. "I take that seriously." A long pause. "Mr. Blackwell will want to speak with Nathan directly. Mr. Blackwell is welcome to send a letter like a civilized person." She met his eyes without blinking. "Good day, Mr. Greer." He looked at her one more long moment. Then he turned his horse, and the two men turned theirs, and they rode back down the road. Amelia stood absolutely still until they were out of sight. Then she went inside, sat down at the desk, and let her hands shake for exactly 30 seconds before she picked up the pen and wrote down everything that had just happened, while the details were still sharp. Charlie appeared in the doorway an hour later. "Were those Blackwell's men?" "Yes." He was quiet a moment. "You ran them off." "I asked them to leave." Charlie looked at the road, then back at her, and she watched him update something in his mind. The file he'd apparently been keeping under the heading Amelia Walker, which had held one set of information until about an hour ago, and now held a different one entirely. "Holt wants to know if he should ride after Nathan and warn him," Charlie said. "No, Nathan has what he needs. He'll be in Helena by tomorrow night." She set down the pen. "But tell Holt to keep an eye on the northwest corner. If those surveyors come back, I want to know immediately." Charlie nodded, turned to go, then turned back. "Mrs. Walker, my mother's brother works at the land office in Helena. Not a lawyer, just a clerk. But he knows who files what and when." He said it carefully, like a boy offering something he wasn't sure was worth anything. If you wanted someone to keep an eye on what Blackwell's people might submit there. Amelia looked at him. What's his name? Eli Betts. He's honest, and he owes me a favor. Write him a letter today, she said. Tell him what we're looking for. Tell him it's urgent. She held Charlie's gaze, and Charlie flushed slightly and nodded, and went back outside a little taller than he'd come in. Nathan came back on the 4th day, not the 2nd. She heard the horse before she saw him, and she was at the door before he'd dismounted. One look at his face told her something had happened. It did not tell her what kind of something. He came inside, took off his hat, and sat down at the table with the careful movements of a man who has been too long in a saddle and is not going to complain about it. The boundary correction is filed, he said. Good. She poured coffee and set it in front of him. What else? He looked up. How do you know there's something else? You were gone 4 days instead of 2, and you're sitting like a man carrying news he doesn't know how to start with. Nathan picked up the coffee, held it, put it back down without drinking. Blackwell was in Helena, he said. Not in person, but his lawyer was, a man named Forsyth. He filed something the day before I arrived. Amelia sat down. What did he file? A claim that the Walker Ranch was purchased originally from a man named Dow under a fraudulent agreement. He's saying my father's original patent was obtained on the basis of a false survey. Nathan's voice was controlled, but there was weight behind the control. He's not attacking the boundary anymore, Amelia. He's attacking the patent itself, the whole foundation. Amelia stared at him. That's a different claim entirely. Yes. And your father's original purchase from Dow, you have the documentation. There is documentation, but it's here. I didn't bring it to Helena because I didn't know I'd need it. He met her eyes. Forsyth timed it. He waited until I was on the road, then filed something he knew I couldn't refute on the spot. Does your lawyer think the claim has merit? He thinks Blackwell manufactured something out of nothing, but manufacturing and having merit aren't the same thing in a courtroom. Nathan's jaw was tight. He says we have 60 days to respond with documentation or the claim proceeds unchallenged. 60 days. Amelia thought about the trunk in the corner. 4 years of ledgers, the letters, the original documents she'd been systematically organizing for 3 weeks. She thought about her father's lesson, the one she'd carried since she was 15, that a document is only as powerful as the person who understands how to use it. The original purchase agreement from Dow, she said. Is it in the trunk? It should be. And witnesses to the transaction, signed affidavits from anyone who was present. There might be something. My father was careful. Good. She was already standing, already moving toward the trunk. Because we're going to build a case that Forsyth cannot put a scratch on, and we're going to do it in less than 60 days. And when we're done, Richard Blackwell is going to understand that this family does not lose its land. Nathan watched her pull the trunk open with both hands. Amelia. His voice was different than she'd heard it before. Quieter, less controlled. She looked up, waited. I need to tell you something, he said. Something I should have told you before any of this. She held his gaze. My father's land, the original purchase. It wasn't just this ranch. He set the coffee cup down. When he bought from Dow, he bought 3 parcels. I sold 2 of them after he died when I was young, and thought the money mattered more than the land. He looked at the table. I've regretted it since. But those sales, they went through Blackwell's predecessor, a man named Crane. Amelia felt something cold move in her chest. Blackwell bought Crane's company, she said slowly. Yes, which means Blackwell now holds the records from those original sales. Yes. And if those records show anything at all that could be read as an irregularity in your father's original dealings with Dow, then Forsyth has material to work with. Yes, Nathan said. Yes. Amelia was very still for a moment. This was not just a boundary anymore. This was not a creek that had changed course. This was a man who had been building a case for years, collecting pieces, waiting for the right moment, who had finally decided the moment had come. Nathan, she said carefully, Did your father have any conflict with Dow? Any dispute after the sale? The silence lasted too long. There was a letter, he said. From Dow, 2 years after the sale. Dow wrote that he felt he'd been underpaid. My father wrote back that the price was agreed upon and the agreement was signed. Do you have both letters? My father's copy of his own letter, not Dow's. Where is Dow now? Dead, 7 years. Did he have family? Nathan's expression shifted, and Amelia, watching him closely, saw the answer before he spoke it. A son, Nathan said. Dow's son. His name is Arthur. And where is Arthur Dow? Nathan looked at her with the face of a man watching dominoes go over one by one. He works for Richard Blackwell, he said. The room went very quiet. Since when? Amelia asked. Since last year. I knew Blackwell had hired someone named Dow. I didn't, his voice was low. I didn't put it together until right now. Amelia sat back down. This was not an opportunistic land grab. This was personal. Arthur Dow had carried his father's grievance real or manufactured to a man with the money and the lawyers to do something with it. And Blackwell had taken it because it handed him exactly the legal weapon he'd needed. The original purchase agreement, she said quietly. Is there anything in it Dow could point to? Any language that reads as coercive? Any clause that looks unusual? I don't know. I haven't read it in years. Then we read it tonight. She reached into the trunk and began to search, and Nathan leaned forward, elbows on his knees, watching her hands move through the papers. You could leave, he said quietly. She stopped. If this becomes something, if Blackwell pushes hard enough, you could go. You didn't sign on for a land war. Amelia turned and looked at him fully, at this man who had stopped his horse on a dusty road, because his mother had once needed someone to stop who had paid for his neighbor's medicine without wanting credit, who had held his land, not because it made him rich, but because it was the thing his parents built, and he would not let a man like Blackwell take the meaning out of it. I didn't sign on for a lot of things, she said. Neither did you. She held his gaze. Find me the document. Nathan reached into the far corner of the trunk and came up with an envelope older than everything else in there. He set it on the table between them. Amelia opened it. And the moment she read the second paragraph of the original purchase agreement between Leland Walker and James Dow, she felt the cold certainty of someone who has just found the thing that was supposed to stay hidden. Nathan, what is it? She read it again to be sure. Your father didn't buy this land outright, she said. There's a clause, a reversion clause. She set the paper flat and put her finger under the words. If the land is ever found to contain substantial mineral value, those are the exact words Dow retained the right to renegotiate the price, within the lifetime of either party, or their direct heirs. She looked up. Arthur Dow is a direct heir. Nathan said nothing. His hands were flat on the table. And Blackwell knows this clause exists, Amelia said. He must. He's been waiting until he had enough evidence of the mineral deposit to activate it. Which means... She heard her own breath catch. This was never really about the boundary, or the patent. Those are legal noise meant to create confusion and keep you looking the wrong direction. What Blackwell actually wants is to get Arthur Dow to invoke this clause. Renegotiate the price at current value, including the mineral rights, and then buy Dow out for a fraction of what it's worth. He ends up with the land and the deposit without ever stealing a thing. She sat back. It'll all look perfectly legal. Nathan's face had gone still and hard. Can he do that? Amelia looked down at the clause, and then slowly she read the rest of the sentence, the part she hadn't gotten to yet. Her chest went tight in a different way. Only, she said, if we let him. There's more in this clause, she said, and she folded the agreement in her hands like it was something she needed to hold on to keep steady. The reversion right expires. It dies completely if the mineral value is developed by the current owner. Nathan, listen to me. If you file a mineral claim on the northwest corner, your own claim properly registered before Blackwell can get Dow to invoke the reversion, Then you establish current ownership of the mineral rights independently of the original agreement. The clause becomes worthless. It's a dead letter. The quiet in the room was a different kind of quiet now. "I'm not a mining man," Nathan said. "You don't have to be. You just have to be the person who files first." She met his eyes. "How fast can we get a mineral rights claim in front of the territorial commissioner?" Nathan looked at her a long moment. And then he said something that surprised her completely, not because of the words, but because of the way he said them, with something in his voice she hadn't heard from him before. Something with warmth in it, and something with weight. The weight of a man saying a true thing he doesn't say easily. "I don't know what I would have done," he said, "if I'd ridden past you on that road." Amelia looked at the table, felt the warmth spread in her chest, and stayed very still inside it for one moment before she let it pass. "You wouldn't have ridden past," she said quietly. "That's not who you are." She picked up the envelope and stood. "Now tell me everything you know about the Territorial Mining Commission. And let's figure out exactly how much time we have." The mineral claim had to happen fast. That much they both understood before either of them said it. Nathan knew a man in Billings, a former ranch hand named Prescott, who'd done some prospecting and understood how to write a proper claim description. He sent Charlie off with a letter the next morning, and Charlie rode hard. While they waited for Prescott's reply, Amelia built the documentation package the way she always worked when something mattered without stopping until it was done. The survey, the land patent, the purchase agreement, and a written account of the reversion clause that she composed herself in language plain enough that anyone reading it could understand exactly what they were looking at and exactly what they were not. It was Holt who interrupted her on the second evening. He knocked on the doorframe, which Holt never did. Holt was a man who expressed concern through action, not presence, and stood there with his hat in his hands, and the look she'd come to recognize as his version of urgency, which on another man would have been outright alarm. "Ryder came through the east pasture," he said. "Didn't stop. Looked at the northwest ridge and went back the way he came." Amelia set down her pen. "One of Blackwell's surveyors? Couldn't say for sure. Wasn't anybody local." She looked at Nathan. Nathan looked at Holt. "How long ago?" "About an hour. Came soon as the fence work was done." Nathan stood up. "I'll ride out and check the corner." "I'll come with you," Amelia said. Nathan looked at her, and she could see him weighing it. The practical man in him calculating whether bringing her was sensible, whether it was safe, whether she'd slow him down. She watched him work all the way through it and come out the other side. "Get your coat," he said. The northwest corner told a story without a single word. There were 3 surveying stakes driven into the ground with professional precision, set in a triangle. One had a small metal tag attached, a number stamped into the tin, not Blackwell's name, not any name she recognized, but a number which meant a filing, which meant it was already in a record somewhere. Nathan pulled one of the stakes from the earth and turned it over in his hand. "They've been here more than once. These are set deep. This wasn't an hour's work." Amelia looked at the pattern, the placement, the spacing. She knew more about mining claim boundaries than she had any right to. Her father had printed several mining company prospectuses over the years, and she'd proofread them carefully enough to understand their structure. "They've already defined the claim boundary," she said. "They're not just surveying the deposit. They've staked the claim itself." Nathan turned the stake over again. "Can they file a claim on land they don't own?" "They can file. Whether it holds is a different question." She looked at the 3 stakes, then up at the ridge above them. "But if they file before we do, even a bad claim creates a legal contest, and a legal contest is expensive and slow is exactly what Blackwell wants. How much time do we have? If they stake today, they're filing tomorrow or the day after. We need Prescott here now." She turned back toward the horses. "Write to him again. Tell him to come immediately. Offer him double what you offered before." Nathan said nothing for a moment. Then, "You know I don't have double." "I know," Amelia said. "But he doesn't know that yet." Prescott arrived in 3 days faster than reasonable, which told her Charlie had ridden harder than he'd been asked. He was a small, wiry man who smelled of campfire smoke and knew more about the territory's mining regulations than anyone had a right to. And when Amelia spread her documentation across the kitchen table and walked him through it, he listened with the focused attention of a man who understands what's at stake without needing to be told. "The reversion clause is the problem," he said when she finished. "The mineral claim establishes current ownership, sure, but only if it's accepted before Dow invokes the clause." He tapped the survey with one finger. "How much time do you think you've got before Blackwell moves Dow?" "I don't know," Amelia said. "That's what worries me." "Well," Prescott leaned back, "here's your other problem. A claim this size over a deposit with a survey like this one, it's going to attract attention the moment it's filed. Right now, Blackwell thinks he's moving quiet. The second you file, he'll know the game's changed." "The game's already changed," Nathan said from the doorway. "He's had his people staking our land. He's going to push harder." "Faster," Prescott agreed. "He'll move Dow before your claim can even be processed." Amelia looked at the survey, at the package she'd built over the past days, at the reversion clause sitting inside all of it like a stone inside a fist. "Then we don't file quietly," she said. Both men looked at her. "If we file a standard claim, it goes through the commissioner's office, gets logged, gets reviewed. Weeks." She looked up. "But if we request an emergency validation hearing, if we present the evidence of Blackwell's illegal survey activity on our land, the staked claim on property he doesn't own, and ask the commissioner to rule on our mineral rights before the contested claim can be processed, then we force this out into the open." "A public hearing," Prescott said slowly. "A public hearing where Blackwell cannot move Dow quietly in the background because everything is on the record." She let that sit. "It'll be loud, that's the point." "It'll be public," Nathan said. "Everything about the deposit, everything about the value of this land." He looked at the table. "That's what I've spent 15 years trying to avoid." "I know." Amelia held his gaze. "But the quiet didn't protect you, Nathan. He found out anyway. And quiet is what he's counting on now." She set both hands flat on the table. "We take this into the light, all of it, and we make it so loud that even Judge Harlan can't manage the outcome." The kitchen was silent. Nathan looked at Prescott. Prescott shrugged in the way of a man who's seen enough frontier legal fights to know that the only predictable thing about them is that playing it safe always loses to playing it bold. "She's right," Prescott said. Nathan looked back at Amelia, and something moved in his face. Not the controlled steadiness she'd come to know, not the settled grief, but something rarer. The look of a man standing at the edge of something large and deciding to step forward instead of back. "Then we go to Helena," he said. "Both of us." They left at first light. Francis Calhoun was waiting at the ranch gate when they mounted, which startled Amelia considerably since it was barely past 5 in the morning and Francis lived 2 miles in the other direction. "I heard you were going to Helena," Francis said without preamble. "Word travels fast," Nathan said. "Charlie Betts has a mother who talks." Francis looked at Amelia directly. "What do you need?" Amelia studied the older woman. 3 weeks ago, Francis Calhoun had stood on a Willow Creek sidewalk and watched this marriage happen with the expression of a person watching a carriage roll off a cliff in slow motion. She had offered Amelia a night's lodging and called Nathan a better man than the town deserved, and she had not in the weeks since been anything less than watchful in the way of someone who has decided to reserve judgment until judgment is warranted. "Letters," Amelia said. "Character letters. From people in this town who know Nathan Walker's family history, his father's reputation, the nature of his dealings over the years." Francis nodded once briskly. "How many?" "As many as you can get. Signed and dated. I'll need them at the commissioner's office in Helena within 4 days." "Francis," Nathan started. "Don't thank me," Francis said. "I'm doing it because Leland Walker was a decent man, and he deserves better than what Blackwell's people are trying to do to his name." She looked at Nathan. Your father helped my husband file his first land claim 22 years ago. Didn't ask for a thing in return. It's time I returned the favor." She looked back at Amelia. "You take care of this." "I will," Amelia said. Francis nodded again and stepped back from the gate. The road to Helena was long, and they covered it faster than was comfortable camping one night along the way and riding into the city on the afternoon of the second day. Helena was not Willow Creek. It had the energy of a place where money moved lawyers' offices, land brokers a courthouse, with a new addition still under construction hotels with drapes in the windows. Amelia hadn't been in a city since Columbus, and the size of it after weeks in the foothills felt strange and loud. They went first to Nathan's lawyer, a man named Gardner, who had the measured speech of someone who'd learned to say everything twice so no one could later claim they hadn't heard it. When Amelia laid the full package on his desk, the survey, the patent, the purchase agreement photographs of the stakes on Walker Land Prescott's claim application, and her own written analysis of the reversion clause, Gardner went through it slowly, page by page, without speaking. When he finished, he looked up at her. "You prepared this?" "Yes." "You have legal training?" "I have a father who believed in reading everything carefully, and a habit of not stopping until I understood what I was looking at." Gardner looked at Nathan. 6 weeks of marriage, and she's already better at this than 3 of my clerks," he said without apparent irony. Nathan almost smiled. "What's our position?" Amelia asked. Gardner sat back. "Stronger than I expected when your husband walked in here 2 weeks ago. The illegal stakes on Walker Land, if you can get those documented by an officer of the court before Blackwell's people pull them, constitute trespass, which undermines any claim filed from that survey." He tapped the document. "The reversion clause is the real danger. But your analysis is correct. A mineral claim filed before any invocation by a Dow heir should establish current ownership independently. The question is timing." "Can you request an emergency hearing?" Amelia asked. "I can. It requires demonstrating imminent harm to the claimant's property rights." He looked at the photograph of the stakes. "I think we can demonstrate that." "How long to get a hearing date?" "Normal circumstances, 3 to 4 weeks. Emergency petition, 10 days, maybe 2 weeks." "And how long before Blackwell can move Dow to invoke the reversion?" Gardner was quiet a moment. "That depends on how much Blackwell knows about what we're doing." A knock at the door. Gardner's clerk put his head in. "Sorry to interrupt. There's a gentleman outside who says he needs to speak with Mr. Walker. Says his name is Dow." The room went completely still. Amelia looked at Nathan. Nathan looked at the door. "Arthur Dow," Nathan said. "He didn't give a first name, said it was urgent." Amelia and Nathan exchanged a look that lasted only a second, but carried the entire weight of the situation, the package on the desk, the 58 days left in their window, the stakes in the northwest corner, and now the man at the very center of the reversion clause standing 20 feet away. "Send him in," Amelia said. Gardner looked at her. She nodded. He nodded to the clerk. Arthur Dow was younger than she'd expected, mid-30s, with his father's coloring, but something his father probably hadn't had, at least not when he'd been dealing with Leland Walker, the look of a man who has been carrying something uncomfortable for a long time and isn't sure whether he wants to put it down or lift it higher. He looked at Nathan first, then at Amelia, then at the document spread across Gardner's desk. And something in his expression shifted. "You already know," he said. "Sit down, Mr. Dow," Amelia said. He sat. "How did you know we were here?" Nathan asked. "Blackwell's people have been watching your ranch." Dow set his hat on his knee. "I didn't know until yesterday that you'd gone to Helena. By the time I figured it out, you'd already left." He looked at Nathan directly. "I came to tell you something before this goes any further." Nathan waited. "My father's grievance against your father. It wasn't invented." Dow stopped. "He genuinely believed he'd been underpaid. I grew up with that story." He paused, and the pause had weight in it. "But when Blackwell came to me 2 years ago and explained what the land was worth and what the reversion clause might allow, I thought it was a way to correct an old wrong." I didn't understand until recently what Blackwell actually intended to do with it. And what did you come to understand? Amelia asked. Her voice was even careful, not accusing. Or not only accusing. That he intended to use me to get the claim invalidated, get the reversion triggered, renegotiate the price at current value, including the mineral rights, and then buy me out immediately at a fraction of what those rights were actually worth. Dow set both hands on his knees. I'd have ended up with maybe 10% of what the land was worth. The rest would have gone to Blackwell. And you only figured this out recently, Amelia said. His lawyer let something slip. Dow said it flatly. Men like Forsyth get careless when they think they're winning. The room was quiet. Mr. Dow, Amelia said. Let me ask you something direct. Do you believe your father was genuinely wronged? A long pause. I believe he thought he was. Do you have documentation of that? His letter to Nathan's father, yes. May I see it? Dow looked at her a moment. Then he reached inside his jacket, produced an envelope, and set it on the desk. Amelia opened it and read it carefully. It was exactly what Nathan had described: a grievance about the price, not an accusation of fraud. James Dow had felt he'd sold too cheap in a moment of need. That was real. That was human. And that was not the same thing as saying the sale was fraudulent. The reversion clause in the original agreement is real, Amelia said. But it requires demonstration of substantial mineral value before it can be invoked. There is no court-recognized assay of the Walker property's mineral content. Blackwell's survey is illegal because it was conducted on private property without permission. She set the letter down. Mr. Dow, if you invoke the reversion clause, you'll be invoking it on the basis of an illegal survey and an unrecognized mineral assessment. Mr. Gardner is a very good lawyer, and he will challenge both. She let that sit. But more importantly, she went on, you'll be doing it in a public hearing that is now a matter of record, in which it will become perfectly clear that you were brought into this by Richard Blackwell for the purpose of generating a claim that would ultimately benefit Blackwell, not you. She met his eyes. How do you think that looks, Mr. Dow? Arthur Dow sat very still. What I'm offering you, Amelia said carefully, is different. If your father genuinely sold at below market value under financial pressure, that's something that can be acknowledged without court proceedings. Nathan Walker is not a man who benefits from your family's hardship. She looked at Nathan. Tell him. Nathan held Dow's gaze. If there was an unfair gap in what your father received, I'm willing to discuss it. Outside of court, without Blackwell involved. Dow looked at him a long time. You'd do that? It wasn't quite a question, more like a man testing the weight of something unexpected. My father wanted to settle things fairly, Nathan said. If he didn't, I'd want to correct it. Another silence. Blackwell will not be happy, Dow said. No, Amelia agreed. He won't. Dow looked at the documents on the desk, at Nathan, at Amelia, who held his gaze without flinching. I have a meeting with Forsyth tomorrow morning, he said, at which point I'm supposed to sign the formal invocation of the reversion clause. Don't go, Amelia said simply. He looked at her. Don't go to that meeting, and send Mr. Gardner a letter today confirming that you decline to invoke the reversion clause and that you're withdrawing from Blackwell's arrangement. She paused. That letter filed with the court today removes Blackwell's primary legal weapon. Dow was quiet a long moment. The clock on Gardner's wall was the only sound. And if he comes after me, Dow said. He'll come after Nathan first, Amelia said. Nathan's the larger prize, but if you're worried about protection, your letter to Gardner today creates a public record that you acted independently. That's much harder for Blackwell to retaliate against than a private withdrawal. Gardner had been listening to all of this with the expression of a man watching something that should have taken weeks happen in the space of 40 minutes. Mr. Dow, Gardner said, I can have that letter drafted in 20 minutes. Dow sat with his hat in his hands one more moment. Then he set it on the desk. Drafted, he said. They were back on the street within the hour. Amelia walked beside Nathan half a block without speaking, and Nathan let the silence sit, which was one of the things she'd come to understand about him. He knew when a person needed to walk their thoughts out before turning them into words. "That was not what I expected today to be," he said finally. "No," she agreed. "Do you think he'll hold?" "I think he made a decision in there that he'll second-guess tonight," she said honestly. "But I also think he's been second-guessing the other decision for a while, and this one sits better. People generally do the thing they can live with. It just sometimes takes a moment to figure out which thing that is." Nathan was quiet a moment. "You were very good in there. I've watched a lot of men make bad deals. I know what they look like from the outside when they're in the middle of one." A pause. "My father made a bad deal once. With his partner. He trusted someone he shouldn't have, not because he was foolish, but because he believed in giving people the benefit of the doubt." She kept her eyes ahead. "I used to think that was what got him killed, not the fever, the weight of it, of having trusted wrong." She took a breath. "But I think now that the trusting wasn't the mistake. The mistake was not having the documentation to protect himself when the trust turned out to be misplaced." Nathan said nothing for a moment. "I'm sorry about your father. He was a good man." She said it simply the way Nathan said things about Margaret. Carried grief, not raw grief. "He'd have liked you. He had very little patience for men who made noise, and very high regard for men who kept their word." They walked. "Amelia," Nathan said. "Yes. When this is over." He stopped, started differently. "When this is settled, I want to talk about the arrangement." She felt something careful happen in her chest. "What about it?" "I want to change it, or I want to ask you if you want to change it. It started as a practical arrangement, and I said at the start that if it wasn't livable, we'd find a fair way to handle it." He paused. "But I don't want to find a fair way to handle it. I want to ask you if it's something else now, for you." She kept walking. Her heart was doing something she wasn't going to acknowledge out loud. "Ask me when this is settled," she said. "Not before." "Why not before?" "Because I want to make sure that when I answer, I'm saying it for the right reasons. And right now, I'm standing in Helena after convincing a man to pull out of a land deal, and emotions are running a certain way, and I'd rather answer you when I've had time to think clearly." Nathan considered this. "That's fair." "I know." They walked on, and then from across the street, a voice called out that changed the temperature of everything. "Nathan Walker." The voice was confident, a man who used it like a tool. "I was wondering when you'd come out of hiding." Richard Blackwell was not what Amelia had imagined. She had built him in her mind out of his actions, the lawyers, the surveyors in the dark, the relentless pressure, and she'd imagined someone colder, harder, more visibly a predator. What crossed the street toward them instead was a man of 50 or so, well-dressed with a broad, comfortable face, and the easy manner of a person who had almost always gotten what he wanted and had refined himself accordingly. He wasn't cruel-looking. He was comfortable-looking, which was somehow worse. He had two men with him. Neither was Greer. He walked toward them without hurrying the way a man walks toward something he already owns. "Heard you've been visiting Gardner," Blackwell said, stopping a few feet away. Then he looked at Amelia with a gaze that assessed rather than greeted. "And this must be the wife. I'd heard Nathan had married. Didn't believe it at first." "Mr. Blackwell," Amelia said. "Mrs. Walker." He said it with the same mild amusement Greer had used, as if the title were somehow provisional. "You've been busy from what I understand. Quite the legal mind for a woman who arrived in Willow Creek with a broken suitcase." Nathan took one step forward, not dramatically. Just one measured step that changed the whole geometry of the encounter. "Watch how you speak to her," Nathan said quietly. Blackwell looked at Nathan with the slight widening of a man recalibrating. Whatever he'd expected from Nathan Walker in this moment, that tone hadn't been it. "I mean, no offense," Blackwell said smoothly. "Truly, I'm impressed." He looked back at Amelia. "You've done well by him. Better than he deserved, frankly." "What do you want, Mr. Blackwell?" Amelia said. What I've always wanted. To purchase a piece of land whose current owner has sat on it undeveloped for 15 years. He spread his hands in a reasonable gesture. I have plans for that territory. Good plans. Development, employment, real money coming into the region. And the people on that land, Amelia said. The neighboring ranchers. The families who've been there for generations. Progress requires some disruption. Progress. She let the words sit between them. That's what you call it. I call it what it is. What it is, Amelia said very carefully, is trespass. Illegal survey of private property. The manipulation of a grieving man's son for your own legal gain. And attempted fraud against a territorial land claim. She did not raise her voice. She had learned long ago that when the truth is on your side, you do not need to. What it is, Mr. Blackwell, is a case I have documented in full that is now in the hands of Mr. Gardner, and that will be the subject of an emergency commissioner's hearing within 2 weeks. Blackwell's pleasant expression did not exactly change, but something behind it did. Arthur Dow, Amelia continued, has withdrawn from your arrangement and filed a letter to that effect with Mr. Gardner this afternoon. There it was. The smallest tightening around his eyes. The first real evidence of something that was not confidence. Your reversion clause strategy, she said, no longer has a claimant. A silence. One of the men behind Blackwell shifted his weight. You? Blackwell said, and his voice had lost some of its ease, not much, but enough for her to hear the difference. Are a very remarkable woman to have accomplished all of that in a single afternoon. The documentation was already prepared, Amelia said. This afternoon was simply delivery. Blackwell looked at Nathan. You knew none of this when I started. This is all her. She's my wife, Nathan said. What's hers is mine. And what's mine, Amelia said, is the land your surveyors trespassed on the legal documentation proving it, and 60 days of evidence that you've been operating in bad faith against a property owner in this territory. She met Blackwell's gaze and held it. We're going to the commissioner's hearing. You're welcome to bring Forsyth and whatever you have, but I want you to understand something before you decide how hard to push. Blackwell waited. I grew up watching my father lose everything, she said, because he trusted that the system would protect him. It didn't. I learned from that. I learned that the system protects the people who understand it better than the man they're fighting. She paused. I understand it better than Forsyth does, and I am not going to stop. The street was quiet around them. Somewhere a door closed. Blackwell looked at her a long moment, at Nathan, back at Amelia. And then he did something she hadn't anticipated. He smiled. Not the pleasant, assured smile of the opening. Something smaller, more real. Nathan Walker, he said, spent 15 years hiding on that mountain because he didn't think anyone would ever see past the land to the man. He looked at Amelia. Seems like someone finally did. He tipped his hat precisely correctly. And then he turned and walked away. Amelia stood in the street and watched him go. That wasn't a concession, Nathan said quietly beside her. No, she agreed. That was a man deciding to change tactics. Should we be worried? She thought about Blackwell's face in the last moment, not the smile but the calculation behind it. A man like Blackwell did not lose gracefully. He regrouped. He found a different angle. Yes, she said honestly, but not today. Nathan reached out and took her hand. Not the way he'd taken it on the road in Willow Creek, not an offered hand, a functional hand, the hand of a practical arrangement. This was different. This was the hand of a man who had just watched someone stand in a street and fight for everything he'd spent 15 years trying to protect, and who didn't have the words for it, so he reached out and held her hand instead. Amelia looked down at their joined hands. Then she looked ahead at the courthouse with its new addition still going up at the sky over the mountains. And she didn't let go. Come on, she said. We need to send a wire to Holt about the Northwest stakes before Blackwell's people pull them. Right, Nathan said. But he didn't let go either, and they walked. Holt's reply came back in under 2 hours, which told Amelia that Charlie had been sitting at the telegraph office waiting, which told her the ranch hands understood the urgency better than anyone had explicitly said. The message was 6 words, which was exactly as many as Holt ever used when 2 would-do stakes documented. Sheriff's deputy witness. Come home. Nathan read it twice. Holt got a deputy out there already. Charlie must have gone to town the moment we left. Smart boy, he is. Nathan folded the telegram, and something settled in his face. Not relief exactly, but the steadiness of a man who has discovered that the people around him are more capable than he'd given them credit for, and finds it both humbling and clarifying. They should have started for home the next morning. They didn't, because that evening back at the boarding house where they'd taken 2 rooms separate, and neither of them commented on the arrangement, Amelia did not sleep. She sat at the small desk in the hallway and went over everything she knew about Richard Blackwell. Not what he'd done, what he was. Her father had taught her that the most important thing about an opponent in a business dispute was never his tactics, but his nature. Tactics changed. Nature didn't. Her father had understood his dishonest partner's tactics too late. But what had truly cost him was that he'd never understood the man's nature, that the partner needed to win more than he needed to be right, that for him, every relationship was a transaction and every transaction was a competition, and Blackwell standing in that street had done something her father's partner had never once done. He had smiled. Not the managed smile of the opening something real. Something that suggested he'd seen something in that encounter that he found genuinely interesting. A man whose primary emotion is contempt does not smile like that when he loses ground. A man whose primary emotion is appetite does. Blackwell wasn't angry that she'd outmaneuvered him. He was intrigued. That was more dangerous. She sat with it a long time. She turned over every angle she could construct a different legal challenge. Pressure on Gardner. Pressure on the commissioner. Social pressure on Nathan through the town of Willow Creek. Each one she picked up and looked at from the inside. It was near midnight when she found it. And it was not a legal move at all. It was a personal one. She sat up straighter. If Blackwell had been watching the ranch, and he had his people had been riding through their pastures, then he knew things. He knew about Charlie, about Holt, about the state of the ranch's finances before Amelia arrived. He might know about the ledgers she'd been reorganizing. He might know about the survey she'd found in the back of the old book. And if he knew that, then he knew something else. He knew that 3 weeks ago, Nathan Walker hadn't known about the reversion clause, but Amelia had found it within days, which meant that for anyone looking at the timeline, the story read like this. Amelia Carter arrived in Willow Creek, married Nathan Walker within 48 hours, and immediately began reorganizing his legal documents and directing his response to a land dispute worth a fortune. Blackwell was going to argue that the marriage was a strategy, that Nathan had brought in someone specifically to construct a legal defense, that the whole arrangement, the practical marriage, the document work, the trip to Helena the Dow conversation, was a coordinated scheme to circumvent the reversion clause before it could be invoked. And if he could make that argument convincingly enough, he could challenge the mineral claim on the grounds that it was filed in bad faith, that Nathan had known about the clause and the deposit all along, and had deliberately structured his affairs to get around it. Which was not true. But true and convincing were not always the same thing. She sat there in the quiet boarding house and thought about how to protect against an argument that used her own competence as a weapon against her. It took another hour, and then she picked up the pen and began to write. Nathan found her still there when he came out of Gardner's office at 11 the next night, with the focused, slightly hollowed look of a man who'd been learning a great deal in a short time. "You should sleep," he said. "I found something. Sit down." He sat on the bench across from her desk, and she told him Blackwell's likely new tactic, the bad faith argument, the way her own role in the past weeks could be turned against them. Nathan listened without interrupting, which was one of the things she valued most about him. He listened the way he looked at things completely, without letting his reaction get ahead of his understanding. When she finished, he was quiet a moment. "So he's going to use you against me," he said. "He's going to try to use us against each other," she corrected. "He'll argue the marriage was strategic. That you knew what you were doing when you stopped on that road. I didn't know what I was doing when I stopped on that road. I stopped because you reminded me of my mother. He looked at her. I didn't know you had a legal mind. I didn't know anything about you. I stopped because you were sitting on a barrel with nowhere to go, and I knew what that felt like. Amelia held his gaze. I know that, she said, and you know that. But in a hearing room, what we know and what we can prove are different things. She tapped the papers in front of her. Which is why I've been writing out a full account of everything. The sequence, the timing, what I knew and when I knew it. What you told me and when. Signed and dated as of tonight. She looked at the pages. If Blackwell argues bad faith, we present this and let the commissioner read the actual timeline. Nathan looked at the papers. You've been writing your own testimony. I've been writing the truth, which is the same thing. He was quiet a long moment. Amelia. Yes. When this is over, I'm going to ask you that question again. The one on the street. She didn't look up from the papers. I know. I want you to know that before we go back. I know that too, she said. And because she was a person who could hold two true things at once, she also knew that what she felt about that question had already answered itself quietly. Somewhere between the trunk full of documents and the mining commission and the street in Helena, where he'd taken her hand and held it without a word about what it meant. She just wasn't ready to say it out loud yet. She kept writing. They rode back into Willow Creek 2 days later, and the town looked exactly the same, and yet entirely different. The same dusty road, the same faces going about the same days. What had changed was the way those faces looked at them. Word had traveled. Word always traveled faster than horses in a frontier town, and people knew that Nathan Walker and his new wife had ridden to the territorial capital and done something significant, and that Blackwell's man Greer had been seen riding hard in the same direction the day before, and had come back looking considerably less comfortable than he'd left. Francis Calhoun was waiting at the end of the main road, not blocking their way, just standing outside the dry goods store at a time of day when she had no obvious reason to be standing outside anything. Letters went out, she said, before either of them could speak. 14 of them, signed by people who knew Leland Walker personally and Nathan from his earliest years. She paused, and her voice went precise in the way it did when she was about to deliver something that mattered. 2 of them are from men who were present at the original land transaction with Dow. Amelia felt something shift in her chest. Francis. The 2 who witnessed the Dow transaction. James Aldrich and Peter Fogg. Fogg's dead. But Aldrich is still living south of here. Both say the same thing. Francis met her eyes. Dow was paid fairly. He accepted the price freely. His letter to Leland Walker afterward wasn't a legal dispute. It was a neighbor's regret. That's in the letter Aldrich signed. Nathan looked at the older woman with an expression Amelia hadn't seen on him before. Open. Almost raw. Thank you. I told you not to thank me, Francis said, but her voice was gentler than the words. The emergency hearing was set for 11 days out from the date of Gardner's petition. Those 11 days were the longest of Amelia's life, and the fastest at the same time. She worked every day, organizing and reorganizing the package into the clearest possible presentation. Gardner came out from Helena on the 8th day to run through the argument, and they sat at the kitchen table for 4 hours, while Nathan delivered the case and Gardner played commissioner, and Amelia sat to the side and stopped them every time something was unclear or weak or open to a challenge she could foresee. On the 9th day, something happened none of them had anticipated. A letter arrived addressed to Nathan from a law firm in Billings that Amelia didn't recognize. She brought it to him unopened and stood while he read it. His face changed. "What is it?" she said. He handed it to her. It was from a firm representing a consortium of investors, not Blackwell, but associated with Blackwell's larger financial network, offering to purchase the Walker Ranch for 3 times the amount of Blackwell's most recent offer. The letter was careful, legally clean, framed entirely as a business opportunity, with no reference at all to the pending hearing, or the mineral deposit, or any of the contested ground. 3 times the offer. Amelia read it twice and did the arithmetic. It was more money than most men saw in a lifetime. More than would solve every problem Nathan currently had, and several he didn't yet have. She set it on the table. "Your answer," she said. Nathan took the letter back, folded it, and set it beside the lamp. "No. Nathan, I know what it is. It would clear every debt. It would give you, Amelia." He said her name the way he said the things that mattered quietly with full weight. "My parents built this place. My mother came west with nothing the way you did. My father worked this land for 30 years. He looked at the folded letter. "I'm not selling it to the people who've been trying to take it from me for 3 years dressed up in a new offer because they're afraid of the hearing." He met her eyes. "What they're afraid of is you. And you're not for sale either." She looked at him a long moment. "All right," she said. "All right," he said. She picked up the letter and put it in the stove. The hearing was held in the commissioner's office in Helena, a large room with good light and chairs arranged in rows that were mostly full, because a mineral rights dispute over a deposit of this potential size attracted attention from people whose profession required them to pay attention to such things. Blackwell was there, Forsyth beside him, 3 other men in good suits in the second row, and Arthur Dow, which surprised Nathan and did not surprise Amelia. He sat alone on the far side, with the look of a man attending something he feels obligated to witness. Commissioner Hale was 60, gray-haired, deliberate, with the face of a man who had spent decades hearing people claim things and had developed an immunity to performance. He read the documentation package for 25 minutes before the hearing formally began, and the room stayed very quiet the whole time. Gardner presented the case cleanly in the order Amelia had designed: the original patent, the boundary correction, the illegal stakes, the mineral claim filing, the sequence of Blackwell's escalating pressure, and the documented timeline. He was good. He'd taken the argument in and made it his own, which was exactly what Amelia had wanted. Then Forsyth rose and presented his counter-argument with professional fluency. The boundary question, the original purchase agreement and its reversion clause. And then, phrased carefully with deniability built into every sentence, the suggestion that the marriage between Nathan Walker and Amelia Carter had occurred with suspicious speed and convenient timing relative to the legal dispute. Amelia sat in the gallery beside Nathan and did not react. She had written out every word of her response 3 days ago and handed it to Gardner. Gardner waited until Forsyth was done. Then he presented Amelia's written account. He read it aloud in full, the exact date she'd arrived in Willow Creek, the exact date Nathan had stopped his horse, the exact date she'd found the survey in the trunk after the marriage, after a week of working the records, and what she'd done with that information the moment she found it. The timeline of every decision documented in her own hand, dated and signed. Then he presented Francis Calhoun's 14 letters. The 2 from witnesses to the original Dow transaction, establishing that James Dow had sold freely and been paid fairly. And then Arthur Dow's own letter withdrawing from the reversion clause arrangement and stating in his own words the nature of what Blackwell had brought him into. The room was extremely quiet. Commissioner Hale looked at the documents a long time. Then he looked at Forsyth. "Counselor, your bad faith argument requires this court to accept that Mr. Walker recruited this woman, a stranger, with no prior connection to the territorial land system, specifically to construct a legal defense before the pending legal challenges had even been formalized." He set down the papers. "The timeline in this account does not support that. The marriage predates the illegal survey activity on Walker land. The document review was initiated as ordinary household management, not in response to any known threat." He looked at Forsyth over his glasses. "Do you have any evidence to the contrary?" Forsyth began to speak. "Evidence," the commissioner said, "not argument." Forsyth stopped. A long silence. "Your illegal survey stakes," Commissioner Hale said now to the room in general, "constituted trespass on private property. That alone undermines any claim derived from data obtained through those surveys." He looked down at the mineral claim. The Walker mineral claim was filed properly prior to any formal invocation of the reversion clause by the property's documented legal owner. He set the file flat. The reversion clause has no active claimant. Mr. Arthur Dow has stated in a witnessed letter that he declines to invoke it. Blackwell, from where Amelia sat, was remarkable. He did not move. He showed nothing on his face that a stranger would read as distress. But she was not a stranger to that face anymore. She saw it. The exact moment he understood that this particular game was finished. The Walker mineral claim is validated, Commissioner Hale said. The contested boundary survey is rejected on the basis of illegal trespass. The reversion clause is noted as inactive for failure of invocation. He looked at Forsyth. Counsel may file further motions in the appropriate venue if new evidence arises. As of today, this matter is resolved in favor of the claimant. He closed the file. Nathan sat very still beside her. She did not move either. She was watching Blackwell. Blackwell stood after a moment, buttoned his jacket with precise, unhurried movements, said something quiet to Forsyth, and walked toward the door. As he passed the row where Nathan and Amelia sat, he paused. He looked at Nathan. "Your father chose well," he said. "Both times." Then he looked at Amelia, and his expression was not the pleasantness of their first meeting, nor the recalculation of the street. It was something she hadn't seen from him before. Something close to respect, if a man like Blackwell was capable of it without using it for something. "Mrs. Walker," he said, and he walked out. The room began to move around them. Gardner shaking Nathan's hand. Prescott appearing from the back rows with a wide grin, people talking. Amelia sat and breathed and let it all happen around her. Then Nathan took her hand under the table, the way he had on the Helena Street. Not for anyone to see, just because it was the right thing. "It's done," he said quietly. "Yes," she said. Across the room, Arthur Dow was putting on his hat to leave. He caught her eye as he turned toward the door. He held her gaze a moment, and nodded once, something in it that was not apology exactly, but adjacent to it. The nod of a man who had made a different choice than the one he'd walked in expecting to make, and had decided to live with the better one. She nodded back. Gardner appeared at Nathan's shoulder. "I'd say this calls for a proper dinner." "It does," Nathan said. He stood and held out his hand to Amelia. Not a functional hand this time, not the hand of a practical arrangement. The hand of a man who wanted to walk through a door with his wife beside him. She took it, and for the first time in as long as she could remember, she did not feel the weight of having nowhere to go. She knew exactly where she was going. She was going home. But she had been in enough rooms with men like Richard Blackwell to know that a man who tips his hat and walks out calm is not a man who has surrendered. He is a man who has already decided what he is going to do next. And 3 weeks later, standing in her own yard at 7 in the morning, she would find out exactly what that was when Charlie Betts came up the road at a hard gallop with a look on his face that made Nathan set down his coffee cup before the boy had said a single word. "There's something wrong at the northwest corner," Charlie said before he'd even fully reined in. "Holt found it at first light. You need to come." Nathan was already on his feet. "What kind of wrong?" "Fire," Charlie said. "But not the kind that starts itself." They rode out hard, all three of them, and what they found at the northwest corner told its own story to anyone who knew how to read it. The stakes Blackwell's men had driven into the ground were long gone, pulled by order of the court after the commissioner's ruling. In their place was fire damage, but the pattern was wrong. Too deliberate, too contained. Someone had set a controlled burn along the edge of the property line, and it had eaten through 3 months of fence work, and more importantly, through the one section of land that held the primary access route up to the mineral deposit. Nathan crouched down and looked at the burn line for a long time. His face had gone to the particular kind of still that Amelia had learned meant he was at his angriest. "This was last night," he said. "How did we not see it?" "Wind was from the north," Holt said from where he stood a few feet off with his hat in his hands. "Smoke went the other way." Amelia walked the length of the burn, and understanding came to her cold and clear. "He can't touch the claim," she said, thinking aloud. The commissioner's ruling stands, so he's not going after the claim, he's going after the access. If the route up to the deposit is destroyed, then mining it becomes significantly more expensive. Nathan finished slowly standing. Maybe prohibitively, which means you'd need outside investment to develop it, Amelia said. Which is exactly where Blackwell comes back in. They looked at each other, and the whole shape of it snapped into place between them. He doesn't need to own the land anymore. He just needs us to need him. Nathan's jaw set. He won't get it. No, Amelia agreed. He won't. But this time, she did not feel the confidence she'd felt on the Helena Street. She felt something harder underneath it, the recognition that they were dealing with a man who, having lost cleanly and legally, had simply decided that legality was no longer worth the trouble. We file an arson report with the sheriff today, she said, with Holt and Charlie as witnesses to the timing, and we send Gardner a letter documenting this as continued harassment following the ruling. She turned to Holt. But first there's another way up. I've seen it on the survey. It's longer, but it doesn't cross through this section. Can you ride the northern fence line and tell me if there's a path that comes up through the Aldrich property border? Holt nodded and went to his horse without a word. Charlie looked at Nathan. He's not going to stop, is he, Blackwell? No, Nathan said. So what do we do? Nathan looked at the burn line, then at Amelia, who was already pulling the survey map from her coat pocket, where she'd tucked it before she left the house, because she had known before Charlie had finished his sentence in the yard that this was going to require the survey. Something moved in Nathan's face that was neither anger nor resolution, but something older and quieter than either. The look of a man who has spent a very long time fighting alone and has finally understood that he doesn't have to. We keep going, Nathan said, same as we've been doing. He looked at his wife standing in the early morning with the map already open in her hands, already finding another way. Same as we've always been doing. The arson report went to Sheriff Dugan that same morning. Nathan dictated it, Amelia wrote it. Holt and Charlie signed as witnesses. Dugan was a man who had been in Willow Creek longer than most of the buildings, and he had the careful caution of someone who understood exactly how much power Richard Blackwell carried in the territory. He listened to everything, looked at the burned documentation, and said he would investigate. Will he? Nathan asked on the ride back. He'll file the report, Amelia said. Whether he investigates in any meaningful way depends on how dangerous he still thinks Blackwell is. And right now, probably still quite a lot. She folded the survey back into her coat. Blackwell lost a hearing. He didn't lose his money or his connections. Dugan knows the difference. So we're on our own. We've been on our own. That hasn't changed. What's changed is that we have a ruling in our favor now, and a paper trail Blackwell keeps adding to. She looked at him. Every time he does something like this, he hands us another document. He can't seem to stop himself. That's something. You think the fire was a mistake. I think the fire was a man who expected to win, and didn't trying to remind everyone he can still cause damage. She paused. It's the move of someone who's lost the long game and knows it. Men like Blackwell are most dangerous when they're patient. When they start acting out of frustration, they make mistakes. Nathan was quiet a while. How do you know so much about how men like that think? My father's partner, she said, and her voice went flat in the way it did around that particular wound. I watched that man for 3 years, watched him maneuver and charm and construct, and finally destroy everything my father built. And I couldn't stop it because I didn't understand it fast enough. She looked at the road ahead. I understand it now. That's the thing about losing everything, Nathan. If you survive it, you come out the other side, understanding things you'd have preferred never to need to know. He didn't respond right away. He was storing it somewhere the way he did with the things about her that mattered. Then stay one step ahead, he said finally. That's the plan. Gardner's letter arrived 4 days later, and it was not the letter she'd expected. She'd expected an acknowledgement of the arson, filing a note about adding it to the record, a cautious paragraph about next steps. Instead, she got 2 pages, and the second page made her set the letter flat on the desk and sit very still before she called Nathan in from the yard. He read it standing up the way he read the things that mattered, no expression moving on his face until he reached the end. Then he set it down. "Harlan," he said. "Yes, Judge Harlan, the territorial judge." Everyone in the region knew. Sat in Blackwell's pocket, the man Nathan had named months ago, when they'd first laid out the landscape of who had power and who didn't, had filed a motion to reopen the commissioner's hearing on the grounds of procedural irregularity. And the irregularity he named was Amelia's written account. Her testimony about the sequence of events. Harlan was arguing that the account had been submitted to the commissioner without being subject to cross-examination, and that admitting it unchallenged had violated Forsyth's right to question the witness. "He wants me in a courtroom," Amelia said. "He wants Forsyth to have a chance to take apart your testimony in front of a judge," Nathan said. "In front of Harlan." "Yes." She picked the letter up again. "Gardner says we can challenge the procedural motion. He thinks we have reasonable grounds." "Do we legally?" "Probably, but a challenge takes time, and time means the mineral claim sits in uncertainty, and uncertainty is what Blackwell needs. If investors think the claim might be reopened, they won't touch the access route development. We'll be stuck." She set the letter flat. "Or we can waive the objection and agree to the cross-examination. Let Forsyth question me in front of Harlan." Nathan sat down slowly. "That's dangerous. Harlan will rule against us on everything he can." "He'll try." "Amelia." He leaned forward. "Forsyth is a professional. He'll have spent weeks preparing to take apart everything you wrote. He'll look for inconsistencies, gaps, anything to suggest the timeline isn't what you say it is. You'd be alone in that room." "I know." "Then why?" She met his eyes. "Because if we fight the procedural motion and win, Blackwell finds another angle. He keeps finding angles. He has money and lawyers and time, and as long as he believes there's a version of this where he wins, he'll keep going." She set both hands on the table. "But if we walk into that room, and I sit across from Forsyth, and he questions every word I wrote, and the truth holds, because it is the truth, then what he has left is nothing." She paused. "He needs me to be afraid, Nathan. He needs us to run from the cross-examination, because if we run it looks like there's something to hide. But there is nothing to hide. Everything I wrote is exactly what happened." She looked at him steadily. "I want to sit in that room and say it out loud where no one can touch it afterward." Nathan looked at her a long moment. "Then we go," he said. "But this time I want Prescott there, and Francis Calhoun, and every person who signed a letter for the commissioner's hearing." "You want witnesses?" "I want the town there," he said, and his voice was even but had iron running through it. "I want people who knew my father and know me to sit in those chairs and watch Richard Blackwell's lawyer try to make a liar out of my wife. Let him try that in front of all of them." Something moved in Amelia's chest, swift and sure, and entirely without warning, the way the truest things always arrived. "Write to Gardner," she said when she could trust her voice. "Tell him we accept the cross-examination." They rode to Helena a third time, and it felt different from the 2 rides before. Not with the urgency of the first or the unfinished weight of the second, the hand-holding the question left open. This time they rode with something steadier. Not calm. The stakes were real, and both of them knew it. But the particular steadiness of 2 people who have decided together and are moving together. Francis Calhoun traveled with them, which had not been discussed. She simply appeared at the ranch gate the morning they left on horseback, with a traveling bag and the expression of a woman who has made a decision and does not require anyone's opinion of it. "Francis," Nathan started. "I was the first person in Willow Creek who saw this marriage happen," she said. "I will be in the room when someone tries to say it was something it wasn't. Don't argue with me." He did not argue with her. James Aldrich came too, the old man who had witnessed the original Dow transaction and signed the letter saying Dow had sold freely and been paid fairly. He was in his 70s, moved slowly, and carried the absolute moral authority of a man who has lived long enough to have nothing left to prove and nothing left to fear. Charlie Betts came because Charlie went where Nathan went and considered this a personal matter. Holt stayed at the ranch because someone had to, and because Holt understood that the ranch itself was part of what they were defending. Gardner met them at his office the evening before and spent 2 hours going over what Amelia would face. "Forsyth will attack the timing first," he said, "the speed of the marriage. He'll try to make it look calculated." "Let him," Amelia said. "He'll question your knowledge of the reversion clause, whether you knew about it before you found the survey." "I didn't. The timeline shows that clearly. He'll question your motivation. Why a woman with no connections in this territory would marry a man she'd known 2 days and immediately begin working his legal documents." Amelia looked at Gardner. "Because I had nowhere else to go," she said. "And because he was the only person in that town who stopped. That's the truth. There's no version of that truth Forsyth can turn into something it isn't." Gardner looked at her a long moment. Then he looked at Nathan. "She'll be fine. I know," Nathan said. The hearing room was fuller than the commissioners had been. Word had spread not just in Helena, but along the roads and telegraph lines that connected the territory's towns, the way word always did when something involved money and land, and the particular frontier drama of a quiet man standing his ground against a powerful one. There were people in the chairs with no stake in the outcome who had come only because this was the kind of story the territory would be telling for 20 years, and they wanted to say they'd been there. Blackwell sat in the same position as before, the same composure. Forsyth beside him with a leather case full of papers and the set of a man who has prepared very thoroughly for something he intends to win. And Judge Harlan was not Commissioner Hale. Where Hale had been deliberate and measured, Harlan was efficient in the way of a man whose efficiency had been purchased. He moved through the opening formalities, quickly established the procedural basis, and nodded to Forsyth. Forsyth rose. He was good. Amelia had expected him to be, and he was better than that. Precise, calm, methodical in the way of someone who's done this long enough to have removed all performance from it and replaced it with pure mechanism. He called her. She walked to the front of the room and sat in the chair facing the judge's bench. And she did not look at Blackwell, and she did not look at Forsyth's leather case, and she did not look at the rows of faces. She looked at Harlan. She wanted to see exactly what she was dealing with. And Harlan met her gaze with the mild professional attention of a man who has already decided an outcome and is going through the motions of reaching it. She understood. And then Forsyth began. He started with the timeline exactly as Gardner had predicted. "You arrived in Willow Creek on September the 4th. Yes. You married Nathan Walker on September the 6th. Yes. You had known him for less than 2 days, closer to 2 hours when he made the offer. The 2 days were between the offer and the ceremony. An unusual speed for a marriage. An unusual set of circumstances," she said. "I had arrived expecting employment that didn't exist with no money and no other options. Mr. Walker needed someone to manage his household and records. The arrangement was practical, and both parties entered it with full understanding of what it was." "A practical arrangement," Forsyth repeated, letting the phrase hang. "And yet within weeks of this practical arrangement, you were managing his legal documents. I was hired, if you want to use that word, to manage his records. His legal documents are part of his records. You found the survey that revealed the mineral deposit. I found it while organizing the contents of a trunk that hadn't been maintained. Yes. And you immediately began constructing a legal strategy. I immediately brought it to my husband's attention," she said, "because that's what any person would do who found a document with significant implications for their household." Forsyth paused, shifted his approach smooth as water finding a new channel. "Mrs. Walker, before arriving in Willow Creek, did you have any knowledge of Richard Blackwell's interest in the Walker property?" "No." "Any knowledge of the mineral deposit?" "No." "Any contact with anyone connected to this dispute before your arrival?" "No." "Yet within 2 months of your marriage, you had identified the primary legal vulnerability in your husband's land claim, constructed a response to it, traveled to Helena, persuaded a witness to withdraw from a legal arrangement. I presented Arthur Dow with the facts of his situation, Amelia said. He made his own decision, and delivered a case to the commissioner that resulted in a ruling in your husband's favor. Forsyth looked at her steadily. That is a remarkable amount of work for a woman who was by your own account a stranger to this territory with no legal training. I had my father's training, she said. He believed in reading everything carefully and understanding what you were looking at. I've done that since I was 15. She held Forsyth's gaze. And I had a very clear motivation. This was my home. Someone was trying to take my home. I'm not in the habit of allowing that. A sound moved through the room. Not dramatic, just the shift of people who have been sitting carefully suddenly settling differently. Forsyth moved to his next prepared question. Mrs. Walker, the account you submitted to the commissioner, the written timeline was prepared by you alone. Yes. No assistance from Mr. Gardner. I showed it to him after I wrote it. He suggested no changes. And you composed it in a single night. Yes. With no reference to legal precedent or procedural guidelines. With reference to the truth, she said, which I didn't need guidelines to remember. Forsyth looked at her a moment, and she watched him recalculate, not dramatically, just the small readjustment of a man who has found that a witness is not going to give him the hesitation or contradiction he'd built his whole approach around. He tried 3 more angles. The rumors from Columbus. She answered them plainly, naming them as rumors, naming their source as people who had needed someone to blame for her father's failure and had chosen her. The question of whether she had coached Arthur Dow. She answered that she had given him information and he had drawn his own conclusions. And the question of whether Nathan Walker's offer on the road had been truly spontaneous or whether he had somehow known who she was. She answered that the idea Nathan had arranged her arrival in a strange town with 11 cents and a dead woman's letter of employment was the least credible thing she had heard in a room full of arguments, and she said it without raising her voice. In the 3rd row, Frances Calhoun made a sound that was almost a laugh. Harlan looked up at the room, and the room went quiet. Forsyth looked at his papers, looked at Amelia, looked at his papers again. No further questions, he said. Harlan's ruling took 3 days longer than it should have for a procedural question, and shorter than it would have if Harlan had been operating entirely alone. What moved in those 3 days, Amelia would only ever partially understand. Gardner made calls. Frances Calhoun wrote another letter, this one not to the commissioner, but to the territorial governor's office, signed by herself and 11 other Willow Creek residents, describing the pattern of legal harassment Nathan Walker had endured and requesting that the governor's office take note of the proceedings. James Aldrich, who was old and moved slowly and had nothing to prove, requested a private conversation with Harlan that Harlan could not easily refuse without visible discourtesy to a witness of his age and standing. And Arthur Dow, who had sat in the room for the cross-examination and heard Forsyth try to dismantle Amelia's account piece by piece and fail, sent a short telegram to Gardner's office that said only, "If you need me to testify in person, I will come." Gardner showed it to Amelia. She read it twice and thought about a man who had grown up carrying his father's grievance had brought it to a man like Blackwell, because it felt like justice and had finally understood the difference between justice and being used. "Tell him we appreciate it," she said, "and that we hope it won't be necessary." It wasn't. Harlan's ruling came on the 3rd day in a document Gardner read aloud to them in his office, and the language was careful and measured and clearly composed by a man who understood that the room he was operating in had grown significantly larger than he'd expected. The governor's office had taken note. There were witnesses of standing. The cross-examination had produced nothing that altered the record. The procedural motion was denied. The commissioner's ruling stood. Nathan read the ruling, set it on Gardner's desk, and was quiet a long moment. Then he extended his hand to Gardner, and Gardner shook it, and that was all. In the hallway outside, Frances Calhoun gripped Amelia by both arms and looked at her with an expression more unguarded than any she'd ever shown. "Your father would have been proud of you," Frances said. Amelia felt that land somewhere deep and stay there. "Thank you," she said, "for everything you did." "I didn't do anything. I wrote some letters." Frances released her arms and straightened her coat brisk, returning to her regular self after a moment of something more exposed. "The rest was you." Blackwell left the territory that winter. Not publicly, not with any announcement. He simply ceased to be a present force. His Helena offices quieted. Forsyth moved on to other clients. Greer stopped appearing on the road. There were rumors that a larger enterprise in another territory required his attention, that the ruling had made the Walker land more trouble than it was worth, that Harlan had quietly suggested continued engagement with this particular matter was inadvisable, given the level of documentation now in the public record. Amelia thought it was probably all of those things at once. Men like Blackwell didn't leave because they were defeated. They left when the calculus changed, when the cost of continuing finally exceeded the value of the prize. She had made the cost high enough over enough months that the prize no longer made sense. She would have preferred a more dramatic ending for him. But she had learned from her father's story that justice in the real world rarely came with a satisfying conclusion. It came with a documentation record and a legal ruling, and the quiet absence of a man who had calculated that you were no longer worth the effort. She would take it. Arthur Dow came to the ranch once in January, on a hard frozen day, when Nathan was in the barn and Amelia was alone in the house. She opened the door before he knocked because she'd heard the horse. He stood there with his hat in his hands and the look of a man who has rehearsed something and is hoping he still remembers it. "I wanted to say it in person," he said, "that I'm sorry, for my part in it." Amelia looked at him a moment. "Come in, I'll make coffee." They sat at the kitchen table, where she had once read the reversion clause for the first time, where a marriage that started as a practical arrangement had become choice by choice a life. "Your father," she said. "What he felt about the sale. Was it real?" "He believed it was." Dow held the cup. "Whether he was right?" He stopped. "I've thought about it a lot. I think he sold when he needed to, and then spent years deciding he'd been cheated because it hurt less than admitting he'd needed to sell." Amelia nodded. She understood that the way grief and need could rewrite a memory until it became something you could be angry at instead of something you had to carry. "He wasn't a bad man," Dow said. "He was just human." "Yes," Amelia said. He set down the cup. "I'm leaving the territory. Going back east. Starting over somewhere that doesn't have all of this in it." He looked at the table. "I think I've been trying to correct a story that was already over, and it's taken me too long to understand that." "You made the right choice," she said. "In Gardner's office. That's the one that matters." Dow looked at her with the expression of a man who needs to be told the right choice mattered and isn't entirely sure he believes it yet, but is working on it. "Maybe." Nathan came in from the barn as Dow was leaving, and the two men stood in the doorway a moment, in the way of men who have been on opposite sides of something and now find themselves simply neighbors. "Safe travels," Nathan said. "Thank you," Dow said. He stopped. "Just thank you." He mounted and rode. Spring came the way it always does. The root cellar Nathan had meant to build for years finally got built. The access route through the northern fence line was developed slowly with Prescott's guidance and their own labor, and the kind of careful investment that did not require a man like Blackwell to make it possible. The garlic Amelia had planted before the first frost pushed through the ground in April, and she stood in the kitchen garden with dirt on her hands and felt the particular satisfaction of a thing that came from her own work. Charlie Betts stayed on 3 more years before he married a girl from a ranch east of town and went to start his own place, and Nathan helped him file his land claim, and Amelia organized his first ledger, and when Charlie rode away on the last day, he looked back once at the ranch house and then looked forward. And that was exactly right. Frances Calhoun became someone Amelia had dinner with on Tuesdays when the weather allowed, and they talked about everything and nothing. And Frances never once said "I told you so" about the marriage, which was the single greatest act of restraint Amelia ever witnessed in another human being. Holt stayed forever because Holt was part of the land the same way the mountains were, and nobody ever asked him to leave, and he never talked about it. And one evening that first spring, Nathan went to the mantel and picked up the tin-framed photograph, the one Amelia had looked at on her first night and made herself look away from. He carried it to the table and set it in front of her. She looked at it properly this time. A woman, young, dark-haired, with a direct gaze, and the expression of someone who knew she was being photographed and had no intention of performing for it. Strong-featured. Real. "Margaret," Amelia said. "Yes." Nathan sat down across from her. "I want you to know about her, not as a ghost, as a person." He looked at the photograph. "She was the most honest person I ever knew. Until you. She said exactly what she meant and expected you to do the same, and she had no patience for men who couldn't keep up." A pause. "She'd have done exactly what you did in that room. Sat down, answered every question, and made Forsyth feel like a fool for asking them." Amelia looked at the photograph a long moment. "She sounds like someone I would have liked." "I think you would have." He was quiet. "I'm not asking you to replace what she was. I don't think that's how it works. I think you hold the people you've loved and carry them forward, and you make room for new things alongside them." He met her eyes. "I've made room." Amelia held his gaze. "So have I." He reached across the table. She took his hand. And they sat in the lamplight with Margaret's photograph between them and the mountain outside, and the whole quiet architecture of a life built around them. "Nathan," she said, "I have something to tell you." He waited. "When you stopped on that road, when I saw you reach down your hand, I thought it was the end of something. The last thing left to try." She looked at their joined hands. "I didn't understand until much later that it was the beginning." "When did you understand?" he asked. She thought about it honestly, about the midnight coffee and the survey map and Helena and the hearing room and his hand in hers on the street and the letter from Billings she'd burned in the stove. "The letter," she said. "The one from Blackwell's consortium. When you said no before, I could even finish reading the number." She held his gaze. "I understood then." Nathan nodded slowly, like a man confirming something he'd suspected for a while. "That was the easy part," he said. She looked at him. "Saying no to that kind of money was the easy part, because you were standing right there." He said it plainly, without ornament, the way he said the things that were most true. "The hard part was every day before that, trying to figure out whether what I felt was something real or just gratitude." He held her eyes. "And it's not gratitude, Amelia." "No," she agreed, and her voice was steady now all the way through. "It's not." Because that was the thing she had come finally to understand, the thing she hadn't known to look for when she sat on a barrel outside Pruitt's store with 11 cents and nowhere to go. A person is not the sum of what they have lost. They are not their broken suitcase or their worthless letter or the rumors that followed them out of a city that had already forgotten their name. They are not their worst moment or the door that closed in their face. A person is what they choose to do at the very edge of everything, when the road runs out and the money is gone, and the only thing left is who they are when nothing else is holding them up. Amelia Carter had chosen to take a stranger's hand. Nathan Walker had chosen to stop his horse. Everything that mattered had grown from those two choices made by two people with nothing to lose and everything still ahead of them. And that was what home turned out to be. Not the land or the legal claim or the mineral deposit beneath the Northwest Ridge. Not the ruling or the letters or the documents finally organized in a trunk that no longer needed to hide what it held. Home was the person who stopped when everyone else rode past. Home was the person who stayed when the truth came out and the cost became real. Home was the choice made before you knew what it would become, and the 10,000 smaller choices made after each one a little more certain, until one day you looked up and realized you were not afraid anymore and hadn't been for a long time. Nathan Walker had offered her a roof before dark on a desperate evening in a town that had already turned its back on her. What she built him in return was something no deed could record and no court could rule on. She gave him back his own name, Not the name Blackwell tried to forge into a weapon, not the name the town had written off as a stubborn mountain cowboy, but the name as it actually was, a man of worth, of quiet decency, of the kind of loyalty that never once asked for an audience. And he gave her back something she had not known she was still capable of believing in, the proof that a person could lose everything and find on the far side of the losing something realer than what they'd had before. She would never stop being thorough. She would never stop reading every document carefully. Never stop knowing exactly where the reversion clause was and exactly how to fight it if it ever surfaced again. But she had learned the thing she hadn't expected to learn, that a home is not a defensive position. That it is not the work of holding something against someone, but the daily work of building something with someone, which is harder and slower and infinitely more valuable. She had arrived in Willow Creek at the end of something. She had not known she was also standing at the beginning. The stranger on the horse had asked her to marry him by sunset, so she'd have a roof over her head before dark. She had said yes because she had nothing left to lose. And in the end, that terrifying decision on an empty road had given her the one thing she had stopped believing was possible. Not shelter, not safety, not even love. Though it became all of those things, it gave her back herself. And no man, not Blackwell, nor anyone like him, would ever take that from her again. She was home. She was known. And she was at long last exactly where she belonged.